Good morning. How's everybody? I guess it's 9 o'clock. We better start, right? Let's get this party going today. Thank you for coming. It's Friday morning, and we've got mostly healthy people today, it looks like, so that's great. Hope everybody's not getting the crud, I hope. How was the show last night? Awesome, right? Wonderful. Dana said she was right up near the front, and they were freaking some little girls out in the front row, I think, with all the ghosts. So very fun show. Well, thank you very much for coming today. We have a really wonderful morning of speakers and presentations to finish out our week at our conference. Any kind of announcements we have before we get started this morning? Yes, yes.
We still need you to sign up on committees, and I don't see a name yet on the 2016 site selection. And that one is a really fun one to do, and there are people who've done it before. We'll be glad to help you with that. If you're thinking about getting involved with KC, that would be a good first step. So 2016, you can sign up on the sign-up sheets out here. I'll have them out this morning. All right, thank you.
And I want to give one more shout out to our planning committee for this conference. They have done a tremendous job. We met them yesterday, and I just thank you very much to the team that helped plan this conference. Such a great deal of work all year went into planning this. So, and thank you for coming. Thank you. Yep. Thank you to our sponsors of the conference. Yesterday we saw them all scrolling, and they're in your program for the conference as well. Couldn't do this without sponsorship, so we really appreciate everyone's support in that area. We're going to get started, and I'm going to have Ashley introduce our morning speaker, and please feel free to ask questions at the end of this presentation this morning. Ashley.
Good morning. I want to introduce Ryan. Ryan currently serves as president of KCnext. Most recently, Ryan served as director of the Midwest Division of Angel Capital Group, where he focused on recruiting angel investors to the greater Kansas City area to fund various ventures in the region. Prior to his time with Angel Capital Group, Ryan served as a development officer for the College of Business Administration at his alma mater, Kansas State University, and spent time as a consultant with Pennington & Company in Lawrence, Kansas. Additionally, Ryan serves on the Chancellor's Advisory Board to the Women's Center at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and is a member of the Executive Mentorship Program for the College of Business at Kansas State University. Ryan further demonstrates the value he places on staying involved in the community by supporting several other organizations in the region. I'd like to introduce Ryan Weber.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How about now? Can you guys hear me? Well, good morning. Thanks for the intro. And it's so nice and thanks to June for allowing me to come speak to you guys today. We get to talk about my favorite topic, which is technology. So I understand there's a couple of technology employers in the room. This has been a theme throughout your conference. I'm excited you got a chance to go see our wonderful city. I know that not all of you are from Kansas City. Hopefully you enjoyed the rep last night. I often take some of my friends to the rep, and often these are the friends that don't like to go to plays, as they call them. But it's incredible. That's such an asset in our town, and it's amazing when I go around Kansas City and talk to people about the rep and the new performing arts center, and it's amazing how many people in our own town have not experienced that. So I'm glad you guys had a great experience last night. That was a tough ticket to get. Was it pretty much sold out last night? It was not? The rep needs to start marketing. So I'll tell you a little bit about our organization and what I do for a living, but for those of you that may not be familiar with KCnext, we serve as the technology council in greater Kansas City. In most major metropolitan areas, there's an advocacy group that helps support the industry, and we're that for this region. And so regional organizations, so Kansas City to us is about a 2-hour drive in all directions. That's essentially how we define Kansas City. It's about 2.5 million people in there, and a giant technology footprint and a big workforce here within this region that's growing every day. So we're a membership-based group. We have about 115 member companies that are involved with the organization, everyone from your big employers like Sprint, Cerner, Garmin, Perceptive, and other global companies like Google and Microsoft, a large number of small to medium-sized employers, and then few startups. So we're one of the few organizations in Kansas City that works with the whole business cycle from startup to large publicly traded companies. And our job is really to sell Kansas City's tech industry to the rest of the world. And prior to our organization, which has really only been around 2 years, 2 years next month actually, prior to that, nobody was telling the story. And so if you were to travel to New York or Silicon Valley and you would say, oh yeah, Sprint, it's headquartered in Kansas City, nobody would have known. And it's not necessarily Sprint's job to announce that they're at Overland Park, but it was really so organizations like ours, it was our job to really tell that story. And so now that we've been able to share that, it's amazing how Kansas City stock is rising among the technology world. And also landing a little project like Google Fiber helps out a lot. And I'll talk about that in my presentation as well. But we didn't always talk about Kansas City in a very vibrant, exciting way. I'm going to share with you a couple of clips throughout my presentation of how we used to market Kansas City. And I'm going to start with from 1979. Now, I was not alive at this time, but this is how
There's a city with more public green space than San Francisco, including the second largest urban park in America, with more fountains than any place but Rome, more boulevard miles than Paris, and cleaner air than Honolulu. Kansas City, one of the few livable cities left.
Life was hard in 1979, wasn't it? But there's some themes in there. So some very creative minds got together and they put together that video. And they were trying to tell a couple of very distinct messages about Kansas City and threw out a couple of statistics that may or may not be true. Like, has anyone heard the fountains, that we have more fountains in Rome? Nobody's counted that. We have no idea. And we will continue to say that because no one's ever asked us to count that. And more boulevards in Paris. Has anyone been to Paris? There's no way that's true. So, but that's what we're known for. I mean, if there's anything that Kansas City is known for, it's fountains, it's barbecue, it's jazz, and we play on that often. So if you drive around Kansas City, you actually will see billboards that we're playing off of this story now in some marketing campaigns, talking about how Kansas City is these things. We have more arts than Austin, which is maybe not true, but it's things that make our city unique that maybe other people didn't know about. So this is all changing. So let's see how we market Kansas City today. Part of a marketing campaign that we're part of called America's Creative Crossroads, which is really what we're defining this part of Kansas City is our strengths are no longer barbecue and jazz, but they're in the arts, they're in music, they're in every food as well, which is similar to what you've seen in other parts of the country that have experienced a renaissance. Like, well, I'll get to that in a second, but we often forget in this part of the country what is our biggest asset, and it is very simple to define. It is where we are located in America. We forget this often. From a technology standpoint, we are the largest, most geographically centered city in the world almost, because all of the nations in the world's fiber optic lines, everything that transmits the internet from point A to point B, runs through Kansas City, because it runs along road and rail. And we are the second largest rail hub, and we're one of 6 cities in America that have 4 major interstate highways that run through our town. And if I was to show you a map of all the fiber optics and all the lines that go underneath the sea, which blows my mind how they do this, but they actually have these little glass cables that run underneath the ocean from Europe to Asia, and we're right in the middle of that. So it makes us very important, and a strategically very important part of the tech industry. In fact, there's a building in downtown Kansas City. It's 1102 Grand. It's the address and the name of the company. But they're the connection point. So they have 40 plus carriers that transmit the internet, and it all connects right in downtown Kansas City. It's something like 2.5 million calls a minute. So every time you text somebody, every time you pick up the phone and call somebody, hits a tower, hits a wire, goes underground, goes somewhere, and it connects in downtown Kansas City. It's redundant, so don't worry if someone wants to blow up that building. It wouldn't cost anything. But. So again, when I talk about Kansas City, the 2-hour drive, it's interesting because our city is also unique because we have a state line that divides that. Makes the business environment here unique, but it's also an asset too. This was one of the major reasons why Google picked us, was because in one part of the country, they could test 2 scenarios, which are the 2 scenarios that they would have seen in a national rollout. In Kansas, all the infrastructure is owned by the government. In Missouri, all the infrastructure is owned by a private utility. So those were the 2 scenarios they would have seen in every market that they would launch in after this. So this was a big part of why they chose Kansas City. In fact, they were driving down State Line Road, and right at 47th Street, there's a park. And they got out of the car, and they could not believe that that was Missouri and that was Kansas. And they were just baffled by this. So they loved us, our city, from then on out. But so again, when I talk about Kansas City, I'm not talking about either one. I'm totally neutral with this. We don't get involved in any of this border war or tax incentive stuff. It's not important to us. We're selling Kansas City, and that's it. And what's going on here and now is very unique. In fact, I personally feel very lucky to be here in Kansas City right now, considering what's going on. Many people probably can't say they were at the beginning of what happened in places like Austin, Boston, and Silicon Valley. And it's the same thing that's happening here that happened there, where the intersection of arts and culture is taking place with technology and innovation. And it's happened a couple other times in our history in America, especially in the 1990s in Seattle. I was a huge fan of the grunge phase. And that music renaissance allowed Seattle to scale companies like Microsoft and Starbucks because young, talented people flocked to Seattle. And that allowed those companies to grow and scale. Seattle was not known for technology prior to this. And it happened at the same time that the music revolution happened there. So fast forward to Austin, Texas in the 2000s. Because of South by Southwest and because Austin, Texas is a giant university and a state capital, a lot of young people live there. And that's allowed them to scale companies like Dell. Cisco Systems moved to Austin. Apple has a location in Austin. And a number of other technology firms because of that workforce and that talent. And it happened at the same time. Austin had a ton of marketing campaigns like Keep Austin Weird. Have you guys seen that one or heard of that, right? It's a cool town. It's an interesting place. But I think we're it. I think we're next. And I don't think there's any other city in the country that can make that claim that they're experiencing the same kind of cultural renaissance that we are right now. It's going to be interesting to see what we'll be known for in 10 years or so. We talk about this time frame in our lives, but I imagine that these 3 areas be a big part of that. Technology, arts and culture, and entrepreneurship. And it's been great watching these emerge over the last couple of years. We've had a lot of wins as a region. Google's a part of that. It's nice that our sports teams are winning. I'm going to be at the MLS game tomorrow dressed like an Eskimo. But that's one of the biggest sporting events here in Kansas City since 1985. It's amazing how many of these things keep coming up. We often don't sit back and realize we hosted the Major League Baseball All-Star Game 2 summers ago. We hosted the MLS All-Star Game this last summer. We're on the map. And I do think the rest of the country is starting to realize that there's more going on here than just barbecue and jazz. Number of new assets that we've received over the last couple of years, including the Power and Light District downtown, which has been great for attracting that young, talented workforce into the city. I'm a big proponent that a strong urban core is extremely important to a strong city, because that was not really our story in the past. When I grew up here and actually moved here in the early 90s with my parents, we were from a very small town in Kansas. Anyone know where Gypsum, Kansas is? A couple people, really good. Okay, I mean, it's like 70 people, so yeah, near Salina. We moved to the big city, and we moved downtown. My dad worked for Western Auto, and we lived downtown while they found a home just out there here in Olathe. I remember my mother telling me, under no circumstances do you ever leave the hotel. And it was dangerous. It was not a safe place to be, because after 5 o'clock, ghost town. There were no restaurants. There was not anything. We ate at the old spaghetti factory every day for months. But that was it. and my mom didn't want to drive. She didn't want to leave the hotel. It was very interesting, but it's changed, and it's changed in a great way because our downtown environment now, and it's often, when I go out with friends and have a chance to visit, I often forget that I'm in Kansas City. And if you have a chance to go visit the new Performing Arts Center, you will forget that as well. It is an amazing facility that's really put us on the map in arts and culture, as well as the new Arts Museum that we received with the Block Building, and then also Sporting Kansas City. So we are quietly turning into the soccer capital of the world. And I would have never have seen this coming, but just out here, just south here at Overland Park is a giant soccer campus. I think about 30 soccer fields. In Swope Park, we're also building a massive complex that eventually will annually host the NCAA championships for soccer. And it'll be larger than the facility out here in Overland Park. But with Sporting Kansas City, when they launched this, they were very smart. So the founders of Cerner bought the team from the owners of the Chiefs. They actually owned it first. And they realized that in Kansas City, there was a gap where NFL and to attend an NFL game is very expensive. So young professionals were priced out of that market. Baseball was also expensive, and we've struggled in that sport. It's coming back a little bit, but not a lot of young professionals were attending baseball games. So they knew that there was a huge opportunity. If they could price it right, they could get a large attendance and following from that young workforce. At the same time, their company Cerner was hiring thousands of these young people, and Sporting Kansas City has been a huge part of our ability to recruit, retain, and attract talent. The younger generation loves soccer, and Sporting KC has been really innovative with using social media to engage their fans in a way that I've never seen happen before. The technology inside that stadium is incredible. It is faster than any sort of Wi-Fi you would have in your home with 18,000 people using it at once. That's impossible. From a tech standpoint, they've figured it out. In fact, they've actually launched a separate technology company called Sporting Innovations to capitalize on this, and just landed a pretty big client called Manchester United, which is the largest soccer franchise in the world. So soccer is quietly going to become, I think, one of our city's greatest assets. And I didn't turn off my email, so apparently something's going on this morning. I apologize. But the biggest lifestyle asset that we've received over the last couple of years is Google Fiber. And I talk about it as a lifestyle asset because that's what it is. It allows us to compete for talent. It allows us to have an opportunity that no other city has right now, even though they'll be deploying in Austin and Provo, and they'll probably announce a number of other cities here in the near future. We were first, and they picked us over 1,100 other cities. Huge national contest, essentially, and they picked us. So for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, and for a number of other reasons, I had a chance to meet with some of their executives recently, and I asked them, I said, are you guys happy with your choice? Now, answer wisely. And they have been absolutely impressed with our community and how it's performed as a test site for them. And, we have certainly experienced the struggles of launching a new company, a new business, and a new product. And the people in Austin and Provo won't have those same experiences because they learned a lot from launching here in this town. But Google is enamored with Kansas City. And, whenever you read in the press that Google doesn't care about Kansas City or that they're no longer focused on this area, is 100% false. They look at this as the test site for almost all their products going forward. So we'll see what happens in that regard, but they love us. This is not something that necessarily takes us to the next level from a technology standpoint, because right now, this is only available in the home. Does anyone have Google Fiber yet, anybody? I get it next month. I can't wait. At the end of the day, this is fast internet. And for the way we use the internet today, you can't use a gig. It is that fast. At most, you would only need a tenth of that, or even less, but you really don't need a gig. But for how we'll use the internet in the future, this won't be enough. Because almost everything in our lives will be connected. It's called the Internet of Things. And you will need this service. So for technology companies that want to hire people and hire and attract talent that wants to have this kind of service in their home, they're going to come to Kansas City because of that. It makes us very competitive for talent, essentially. And our employers, when I met with them a couple of years ago, especially some of the bigger employers, they're very concerned about the future of Kansas City because our feeling is, and maybe this is shared among some of the employers, that in the future, technology companies will only exist in cities where young, talented people want to live and work. Because talent is the only thing that makes them competitive. Because if they can't hire the kind of people that can think creatively and execute and build these products, they can't compete. And that's why you see Google will just buy a company for $100 million, and people look and say, what would they need that product for? They don't want the product. They want the talent. And so that's the kind of business they're in now. And it's extremely competitive, and that's why we have got to build the kind of city that will attract that workforce. And I think we are. I think it's an exciting time for us, and it's great to see that we have all these new assets and these young people coming here. Now when I talk to those employers, and I talk to them about Kansas City, and we do a lot of education with the frontline recruiters and HR folks about how to sell this city, and don't talk about barbecue and jazz. It's changing. You know, now they're getting candidates to fly in from places like Silicon Valley and Boston and Austin. And in the past, they wouldn't have even stepped foot on the airplane. So it's good. Things are changing. This was a funny article that it was actually, I think, in Wired or Inc. magazine. They had this graphic. And if you can't see it, there's this Venn diagram, and it shows in the middle reasons to move to Kansas City or Austin. It's because of Google Fiber and great music and great food. So in Kansas City, we have all of these creative people in Kansas City. So this is, again, part of the America's Creative Crossroads campaign, where we started to tell their stories for them. It's amazing how some of the people in this infographic here are more famous outside of this area than they are inside. But it's famous chefs, musicians, Pulitzer Prize-winning folks, and we have a number of very talented folks in our backyard, and we don't even know it. And it's really at the core of our DNA. I mean, Walt Disney started here. Mickey Mouse was drawn at 31st and Truce. I mean, it's really part of our whole history of the city. Hallmark founded, scaled, and started here, and Hallmark has brought talented, creative people from all over the world, and once they come here, we can't kick them out. So they have families and children, and they have started to create a whole movement of creative people in Kansas City almost. So if you combine that with all the creative companies we have in Kansas City, what we have is a very unique environment. And there was a Gallup poll done a couple of years ago from polling the top CEOs in America, and they essentially asked them, what skill is the most important when you look for a new leader within your company? And far and wide, creativity was the number one thing they came up with. I bet now it's going to be more like creativity and technical skills, but creativity is a big part of what makes the world go round. And these companies here in Kansas City have been more engaged in the tech industry and entrepreneurship than ever before. You know, we don't have a ton of venture capital in Kansas City, which funds a lot of this startup movement. What we have are these very entrenched industry organizations that can really help scale companies. And in fact, a couple weeks ago, we hosted an event with a couple of local corporations called Reverse Pitch, where Sprint, H&R Block, DST Systems, the Kansas City Chiefs, and UMKC actually got up on stage and pitched real-world industry problems that they need local companies to solve. And this is on our website if you want to see the event. And right now, currently, we create a web portal for companies to go back and apply. And I will bet a Kansas City company is going to get a deal out of this. And they're very interested in this because they want to partner with local organizations, and they want to find out where that talent is. And if you have students that are looking for a project or something to work on, those companies would love to work with them. And some of the solutions, like for the Chiefs, if you've ever been to a game at Arrowhead, I'll give you an example of their pitch. People love their pitch. So Chiefs have a big opportunity for a company to partner with them. They have an issue with parking. So if you've been to Arrowhead, you may know what I'm talking about. And they are very concerned, the NFL is very concerned, that eventually they'll be playing games where there may not be a full stadium because the experience is pretty daunting. It's expensive, there's lines for parking, food, beverages, it's all very costly. And so the Chiefs had a number of different issues with parking, but there's 6 entrances to Arrowhead Stadium, people only use 2. So all of those 70, 80,000 cars are coming into the same bottleneck. So you can wait in line for up to 30 minutes getting in and out of that stadium, and getting out is actually up to an hour sometimes. So with the technology today, if you live in Kansas and you have a K-tag and you fly through that line, there are so many opportunities to solve that, and the chiefs are willing to pay someone to do that for them. So that's one example of the companies that we're pitching, and they're very serious about this. So it's kind of a unique opportunity. I don't think this has ever happened before. And it just kind of shows how the culture in this city is of these big companies wanting to work with the talented folks in this area. And it was a good event. It was pretty exciting to watch. And if you want to check it out online, you can visit our website at KCnext.com. So I got another quick video. This video highlights some of the assets I'll talk about through the last part of my presentation, but it's about the industry in general.
Technology. It's the result of humankind's deep desire to innovate, to create something new, different, better. Technology has brought humanity closer together than ever before, connecting us, inspiring us, and changing how we experience our lives. Kansas City is the next destination for technological innovation. Located at the center of one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, businesses and individuals are coming to Kansas City to develop tomorrow's tech solutions. A place where educational institutions are rising to meet the demand of a growing community of young minds interested in next-generation solutions. Where medical technology companies are developing new tools that improve the quality of healthcare. Kansas City is host to emerging information security technology that keeps the data we use every day more safe. Where digital storytellers are experimenting with new media applications and experiences. And where some of the biggest tech companies in the nation are beginning to test new innovations in mobile, communication, and information technology. Humankind innovates. We challenge ourselves. We look to the future, and we imagine. Kansas City is no different. It's a place where people gather together and ask the same question that drives the brightest minds. The question is, what's next?
So there's a couple of themes in that one too. You can see we mentioned digital storytelling. So if you think about the way that content is delivered today, screens are a big part of our lives. If you notice when YouTube first launched, the average video was like 10 minutes long, and now it's like a minute 30, 2 minutes. Short stories are going to be incredibly important for how content is delivered and how advertising is delivered too. And if you see some of maybe you've seen some of the most viral advertising campaigns. Anyone see the recent Kmart one with Ship My Pants? It's pretty funny. It's PG, I promise. But that's the future of advertising, as well as anyone seen the John Claude, the epic Split? Has anyone seen that one? If you haven't, it's pretty incredible. But that's essentially how advertising and content will be delivered. And Kansas City quietly is a capital for a lot of that. And again, because of Hallmark and all the creative people that they've brought here, and they've had children, those children have had children, and those children run digital media studios in the Crossroads. And that industry here in Kansas City, digital media alone, it's about 38,000 people, 60 firms plus. Many of them are located right in the Crossroads of Kansas City, so between Union Station and downtown. They all know each other. And they work on everything from major Hollywood films to commercials to short stories that are edited and turned into cartoons, and you name it. But no other city can really take claim to that. The only other city that could really call themselves the short story and digital media capital of the world is Hollywood. And they're pretty well branded at this point. I don't see them shifting from the major motion picture film industry capital. So that's one that I would watch. And that is going to be a very exciting growth opportunity for Kansas City. So I know there's some numbers people in the audience, so I'll go through a couple of these real quickly about our tech industry, and then I'll wrap up for questions. But 3,500 employers in our region. It's a workforce of about 38,000. Now, this is truly on the technical side. So these are your developers, your engineers, your software publishers. If I was to compare that to Silicon Valley, it'd be 440,000. So we don't compare to regions like that, especially if you look at those numbers. And we're not trying to, but we compete consistently with Silicon Valley, and especially the way that we're ranked. So these numbers, we don't compare well. Now the average salary though, so that's a pretty incredible number, by the way. So the average salary in this industry is just over $88,000. If you are either a high school graduate or some college or a college graduate with a technical certification in either .NET or Java, Cerner will hire you at about $58,000 and scale up pretty quickly from there. And I don't know about you, but when I would have graduated college, that kind of salary, that would have been fantastic. And I have friends now, it's amazing, when I was in business school at K-State, they would say, if you want to make six figures out of college, you need to learn Mandarin. Now, you need to learn a technical language. And this skill will be so highly demanded in the future that pay is just going to continue to rise. And you don't need to just know the technical skill, you also need to have a well-rounded education of how to work with people, how to manage a project, and other core competencies. What's going to get you that job is the technical certification. And there are over 9,000 jobs currently open in Kansas City for technical positions, 9,000. And they've been open for a long time. So if you have students that are okay at math and love video games, they can have an extremely bright future. And those are really the two skills that they need. They have to have math. And even though a number of those algorithms and things that are created for technical solutions, it's done by the computer, you still need to comprehend how that works. So math is still very important, but you don't have to be a math expert to have a very bright future in technology. You have to have a base level knowledge of that. And the good and bad, so I was talking to June about this earlier, but when Kansas City has a huge opportunity to dominate this space, no other region or city or area of this country is producing the amount of talent that that industry needs. And nobody's really figured it out. And I look at that as a huge opportunity for us with the strength of our education system, which is, again, one of our biggest assets of this region. We have great schools. We have over 20 universities that support the workforce in our area, which is incredible for the size of our city. If we could figure this out and create more tech talent than any other region of the country does, we'll own the industry. Because, again, that is the most important part of why a company chooses where to operate and where to have their headquarters. It's all based on talent. In the past, and in other industries, it's based on tax incentives and other things that go on. Technology does not care. Tax incentives do not matter if there's not a workforce that can support their company. So a couple other statistics I'll share with you. The easiest way you would say to think, well, we need to create more people that are interested in technology. We've got to find a way to make this more interesting to women. That would be a really easy way to solve this problem, but we're actually doing better than the rest of the country. The national average for women in technology is around 20%. So I mean, it's not like we can pat ourselves on the back, but I don't have the solution to this, but we've got to find a way to interest more women into this field. It's continually male-dominated. And here in this area of the country, too, it's a very young workforce as well. So from 25 to 44, which is good. Again, because companies make those decisions about where to locate based on that young workforce. Number of great employers here in Kansas City. We often forget when we look around and think about, technology today, the biggest industries, the most important ones, the major players in those industries are located right here in Kansas City. It's a huge asset of ours. We have this exploding entrepreneur startup world. In fact, one of the companies on this slide, iVerify. Has anyone heard of this company before? They've been receiving a ton of press. Have you? Great. So, interesting technology. It was actually commercialized at a UMKC. There was a researcher there that found a way to make an imprint of the vasculature of your eyeball. So, allows you to access a device or a room or something like that by scanning your eyes. In the past, this is always either done through your iris or cornea or something like that. They can actually scan the veins, the blood vessels in your eye. And that's way more accurate than a fingerprint. And not to creep anybody up, but you have to be alive to have veins in your eye, so can't take that from you. This company's going gangbusters. They actually just won a global competition for startups and received the opportunity for €1.5 million euro, which would be even more dollars. And they're based in Kansas City. They're based in an area of Kansas City called the Startup Village, which was the first neighborhood that Google Fiber launched in. and there's about 20 to 30 startups that essentially bought homes or moved into these homes in that part of town. It's at 45th and State Line, and it goes between 45th and Westport Road, and that was an area of town that needed something like this. And so even though these companies are making headway and creating a lot of disruption in their industry, they live and work in a house in Kansas City, Kansas. So it's a very interesting time for us. We've been receiving a ton of national press. Our organization helps manage a lot of this for Kansas City. We have representation out of New York City that helps place a lot of these national stories and global stories. In fact, we've worked with a number of publications all across the world, a number of Asian publications, really trying to tell Kansas City's story. Because if you're from here and you move to Silicon Valley or Boston for a job, and you have 2.5 children, and you can't get them into a good school, and you consistently read about your hometown in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, in Inc. magazine, and a recruiter calls, you're going to pick up the phone and you're going to answer. And that's our talent recruitment strategy. In the past, we weren't showing up in any of these publications. Nobody was telling that story for Kansas City. So it's been fun to see this start to happen. I'll give you a couple examples here. So Entrepreneur Magazine, which is one of the most well-read tech and entrepreneur publications, recently listed us as a hub for tech startups. We were listed as a top city for female entrepreneurs, which was a great article in Forbes. They actually beat a number of cities that are considerably larger for us. We're actually ranked number 13, which is great. Travel and Leisure. Travel and Leisure loves Kansas City. We're consistently ranked as a top burger place, pizza place, you name it. Travel and Leisure just loves this town. They listed as one of America's techiest cities. We were number 10. We beat places like Chicago, New York, and LA. And all of this, when you add all this up, actually created around 18 million impressions online for Kansas City last year. So a number of eyeballs and just a huge target in Kansas City of what is going on here. And that's really what a lot of people around the country are asking. So we're part of an international organization called TECNA. It's tech councils from all across the country. And we recently produced a study and a survey that went out to, I think it was around, I think I have some of the stats up here. It was around 1,700 or so executives, a huge survey. And I wanted to share some of this data with you because as you go back, I want you to make sure that you understand kind of what's going on across the country and how we compare as a region. But first I want to talk about, and June asked me to mention a little bit about Kansas City's digital divide. So when Google launched, this was something that came up a lot, and especially in the media, and really what that meant. And Google, their main mission was really try to help solve this problem. Part of their package with Google Fiber is they'll give you free internet for, I think, 7 years. If you can pay the installation fee, I think is how it works. Is that correct? Yeah. I don't know why I blanked on that. That's incredible because even if you want to scale up to fiber at some point in time, your house is still wired, adds tons of value, but it's still difficult because the people they were trying to reach didn't understand the value of the internet. But if you want to apply for a job today with anybody, all those applications are online. So it's extremely important to your future to have that access. So they did a study, and they found that 25% of Kansas Cityans have no access at all, 25%. And of that 25%, 17% don't even go online. So I really want to dive into that 17% of who they are and making sure that we all understand, and that will help us, I think, target and educate that group of people. So this all kind of breaks out a little bit differently and evenly, but 44% of those were 65 and older, 44% were African American, and the most interesting one, I think, is that 64% was based on education. They either had a high school education or less. Education is such an important part of digital literacy. I think it's part and a role that all of you play. In this survey I was talking about, there was about 1,700 C-level executives that were surveyed. Of those, about 63% plan to hire over the next 12 months. And if you were to do that in other industry segments, you would not see that same percentage. It would be much lower. And in fact, the largest percentage of companies that said they're going to be hiring is small companies. So, however, perception is reality. So of the same amount that were surveyed, 69% believe that there's actually a shortage in the quantity and quality of tech talent available. Many of these companies expect to increase their investment, and it's amazing to see kind of where those different industry sectors are planning to increase. Many of them expect to see increased investment year over year, and this didn't really change very much over the last couple of years. And in technology, I think that you have to make these investments in order to compete. The interesting here is there's, again, the perception of tech talent available. And 44% of the people that were surveyed believe that there is a moderate shortage. It's hard to know the numbers to see how this compares to reality, but again, it was pretty interesting. And the other part about workforce gains and losses in projections, that 63% claim that hiring staff in positions that were newly created an additional headcount over the next year in 2013. The other thing that was interesting was that they were 31% very unlikely to hire foreign workers should they become available, which is interesting to us. We've done a lot of lobbying on behalf of making the H-1B visa process easier, but those C-level executives still believe it's very unlikely that they'll hire those folks. And I bet you tell your students that it's a global workforce, you have a lot to compete with. I would still preach that message, even though the survey showed a different result. And then for us, those executives gave themselves a self-assessment of their region as a desirable place for local tech startups. And the Midwest, even though we've seen this great renaissance and growth in that area, 53% still view us as a mid-tier location. So we still have some work to do there in the overall perception. Other thing that was interesting was most of these executives believe that the tech sector is underperforming and not reaching its potential, especially here in the Midwest. 70% believe that it's underperforming. And there's also the perception of factors that can inhibit that growth. Financing and the ability to raise capital is a big part of that. I come from that world a little bit. I helped run an angel group here in Kansas City. I can tell you that here in Kansas City, that even though the wealth and then the folks that were angel investors, they didn't get that way from investing in technology. So we still have a ways to go there. And this was a part of, again, for the national side, the expectation of the sector's ability to drive innovation and job growth. The two biggest sectors are IT and telecommunications and life sciences. Those are two of the biggest strengths of Kansas City. So we are, again, really well positioned for growth in this area. And then I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'm actually going to stop and not share this last video, but these are all online on our website. But Augie's story is really unique in his story about Kansas City, but I'm actually going to stop, and I know we're kind of running out of time. So I will pause and open for questions. Yes? Sure, that would be your top executive leaders. So your CEO, your CIO, your Chief Information Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Financial Officer, and there's some other creative terms that companies like to use for those folks. But it is your top executives. Mm-hmm. Yes? And gaming is hot right now, isn't it? Especially if you saw they sold, what, like 1.8 million Xboxes on the first day. That's a big industry. That's iPhone level sales. And I don't know where they work. And this is tough because gaming is hard to define, right? You still have to have a base level technical knowledge in things like .NET, Java, and a few other skills like Ruby on Rails, Python, and some other popular ones. But gamification is a term that comes up a lot in the tech industry where, let's use pharmaceuticals, for example. One of the biggest problems with pharmaceuticals is that patients don't take medicine correctly. And they've tried to create a number of games to incentivize patients to take medicine correctly. And one of the biggest areas is transplants. So there's a medical regimen you have to take to ensure a successful transplant without rejection. Huge market opportunity. They've tried a number of ways to do it, but it takes that creative game to make that happen. So there are opportunities, and there will be more. I just don't know where they are. Yes? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was a local tech startup that was trying to create a game that would encourage children to learn how to code. And they had a very tough time finding game developers. It's a niche within the tech industry that I think is going to be more and more. I mean, I think big corporations are a good example of creating those modules that train workforce and customers about how to use products. It's essentially a game, but again, it's hard to define that. And the big employers like the Microsoft, Xbox, Nintendo, and PlayStation, and those, most of that operation does not occur in America. It's an Asian operation. So I'm just not familiar with it, unfortunately. Are you seeing interest from students that want to go into that specifically? Yeah. It's like robotics. It's really cool, interesting stuff. I just don't know how many opportunities are available for true robotics stuff. I think it puts them on a path to further interest them in engineering and opportunities, but true robotics positions, there are not that many right now. There could be in the future, though. Any other questions? Or? I feel like I have a ton of questions for you guys, too, just because this is like speaking to the folks on the front line. Yeah? A degree in gaming. Are those students that are graduating in the gaming program, are they finding opportunities in gaming? In Kansas City? Yeah, I can see that. Well, animation, yes. So, again, that digital media world, and many of those are small firms. I know that Hallmark would have a huge interest in that. But that operation for Hallmark, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the company, but I believe it's out of Hollywood. It's not out of Kansas City. Most of their animation work occurs outside of this area. But don't quote me on that. That's a big company. It'd be hard for me to know the ins and outs of that. So, yeah. Yes, in the back. Yeah, absolutely. If I could do it all over again, I would still have received my business degree, but I would have had a technical certification attached to it. And that would be in something like .NET or Java, because if I could understand the tech side of it, I could be really impactful on the business side. And, but if I was more passionate about building the products, then I would have gone down that path. It's interesting because, I don't want to speak on behalf of all the employers out there, but I do feel like we're moving into a skills-based economy versus what we were in the past, which was very much an education-based economy. And that skill, where we're looking at these online courses, and you guys know what MOOCs are, right? And it's funny, I speak other places, they don't. Those massive online open courses, employers, not so much here in the Midwest, mostly on the coast, are looking at that and saying, we'll count it. If you have received those courses, and even the state of California, if your class was unavailable and it was available in a MOOC format, it would count towards that credit at your university. That's very disruptive. But it's hard to say. Again, I think that we got to be very careful about what the student's most interested in versus what we pressure them into deciding as far as their path. But to be really marketable, I think you have to have a diverse set of skills. And those have to be easily defined on a resume. Because as employers, you get thousands and thousands of resumes. It needs to stand out what those skills are. And they need to match with the interests of the industry. Greco-Roman wrestling isn't going to get you very far in this world. I think it's going to be very difficult. So there's still a ton of value in having a liberal arts education. I don't want to discount that. But there's 9,000 open tech jobs, and they need talent. So, I hope the students understand that. I really do. Yes? Yeah. So let me ask you all a question. We'll do a quick poll. How many of you firmly believe your institutions can keep up with technology? Oh, gosh. Guess what? The industry agrees. It's okay, though. I think the easiest solution to this is as much as you can to engage the industry in the classroom. That is going to be a critical part to making sure that your programs and your curriculum are relevant. You can't keep up. I can't keep up. The industry sometimes can't keep up. But if you can find a way to engage those folks into the curriculum in any way, shape, or form, you will have extreme value as an institution. And I think for your roles too, in placing these students, you'll create a relationship with that employer. And that's really important for them and for you and for your students, because that will define resources. I mean, I work with these major corporations. They are willing to invest in something they can get excited about if they're at the table. And they're not right now, and that frustrates them. Sometimes. I mean, it's not every situation, but you see major employers investing millions and millions of dollars in programs they can get excited about, and working with them to learn what is exciting to them, what their needs are, can have extreme value. But curriculum, I think it's going to be hard to keep up. I really do. Hopefully that answers your question. Sort of. It just does, yeah. Say that again? Like you had talked about the .NET and yep. Java and having those skills. Are there more skills? So it'll change in the future. I mean, even like next year or the year after, we won't be talking about things like .NET and Java. There will be some new technical language that's in demand. And those certifications, though, and I think all of your institutions have the ability for students to take certification courses in the current technical languages that are in demand. And again, if you define the employers in this region that are most interested in your institution, what are those demands? Because like Cerner doesn't need Java, they need .NET. That may not be the same thing for Sprint and others. It's all based on whatever platform they've essentially married. And I mean, you've seen a press probably recently where Cerner plans to hire like 15,000 people before 2020. I don't know how it's going to happen. They probably don't either. But there's huge opportunity there. And so it's hard to define. You know what I mean? So I don't want to tell you to pick one, because there's going to be a need for those just be in the future. And I think that's why it's important to engage the industry, because they're really at the forefront of what those needs are, and they will tell you and share that information with you. Am I correct? Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to share it. So, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I know you work with these wonderful young creative entrepreneurs. There's a disconnect there. Thoughts on that and how education
Ooh, I don't know that we. Ooh, it's deep. I don't want to get in trouble here. This could be a tough audience to describe that, but education still plays the most important role in creating the kind of workforce that we need to compete. It really does. There's still extreme value, both from a social maturity and education standpoint, of going to one of your great institutions and graduating. There's still extreme value in that. I don't foresee that changing in the near future. But as long as they can graduate and again be able to define what skills they have that are relevant in today's workforce. And if that only takes a 2-year program to define for them, to put them on a path to success, I think as the cost, which I know none of us can control, but as the costs continue to rise, I think more and more students are really going to be taking a hard look, and way before, probably any of us had to, what do we want to do with our lives? And they're going to have to make those decisions much quicker than any of us did. And that may be that they don't go down that same path in the future. I don't know. Because in technology, again, like employers, if you're a very talented developer, and you're a very talented developer at a high school level, and you can code in these languages that I've mentioned, you got to take a hard look and a decision of whether or not you go to a 4-year institution. because there's a good chance you can get a job at an employer and they'll pay for you to go part-time. And as that cost rises, I think that's a decision that many students will be faced with more so in the future, because again, that talent is very important to find and hard to find. And so if they do find that student, I can see companies will be much more interested in investing in that person in the long term, especially companies of scale. So that's probably not an opportunity for many of the small companies in Kansas City, but companies of scale will be able to have the resources to do that. Any other questions? Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Hopefully this is worthwhile, but thank you very much.